Hi there.
Hello. All right. So before we start, I'm going to explain what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you a few questions and whatnot, and then I'm going to edit it and put it onto YouTube. Okay. So formerly you worked as the head of the European Commission's Anti-Drug Policy Coordination Unit. Could you explain what your role was in this organization?
Right, in the Commission, you mean?
Yeah.
In my role in the European Commission?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, it was a coordinating and policy-making role. The Commission is, if you compare it to a government, it's got a whole range of ministries. So we have, a Director General for External Affairs, as there are other Directors General, Internal Market, which deals, for instance, with things which are used as precursors for making drugs. So we had to make sure that all these various departments were singing from the same hymn sheet. That was one aspect. The other aspect was to get a certain policy line through in the Council of Ministers of the EU, and to get it reflected in international fora such as the UN, the Committee on Narcotic Drugs, in Vienna. And my unit basically did the drafting, wrote proposals for legislation, and these were adopted by the member states.
Thank you. What is the role of the EU and this unit in implementing drug policies across other members of the Union?
Okay, the European Union doesn't implement drug policy as such in member states. That remains the remit of the member states of the EU. What the Commission can do, what the EU does do, is to gradually give a proper political and legal basis to a shared approach that you get across European countries, which is less a war on drugs and much more a balanced approach, based much more on prevention, and which accepts harm reduction as a standard part of the whole dealing with the whole issue.
Okay. Could you go in a little bit more depth about your experience here and what actually helped shape your opinions?
Yeah, I think it would be a bit arrogant to say that I shaped my opinions. When I took over this job in 2003, the EU and the European Commission had been thinking in a fairly sort of enlightened way about the whole drugs problem for some years. There was a growing awareness that this problem was not going to go away, that the war on drugs approach was not really helping. On the other hand, all the member states of the EU are signatories to the UN Convention, so we couldn't do what we liked. We are in that system. So what the EU did was, through a rather sort of laborious and boring system of action plans and strategies, go along a road which you could call a sort of regulation by default. It was a sort of tolerance by stealth more than anything else, placing a great deal of emphasis on prevention, treatment, public health issues, while at the same time going for organized crime and so on. I'm not sure that the record of the EU in dealing with organized crime is that great. On the other hand, I'm not sure that we have the same sort of serious problems that they have, for instance, in both North and South America.
I see. So you now work for the LEAP. What is this organization? What is your role within the organization?
Yeah, I don't actually work for LEAP, actually. I should be honest about this. I am on LEAP's advisory council, as they call it. LEAP is an organization, it stands for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's essentially a US-based organization of policemen, mostly former policemen, judges, prosecutors, and so on. People who have spent quite a large part of their lives putting drug users and drug dealers, but very often drug users behind bars, and who see the futility of what they've done and are now actively campaigning for an alternative to the sort of very hard system that applies in the US and which has led to a huge prison population.
So in your opinion, if prohibition isn't the answer, then what would be a better alternative and why?
The uncomfortable truth about drugs is that, one, it's not going to go away. A world without drugs is an illusion. I think most people who work in the field understand this. It's very difficult for politicians to stand up and say this more than once if they want to be re-elected. We all know that. But the bottom line is that governments have to get their hands dirty in some way in distributing drugs themselves so that they can control the way they are consumed, so that they can do something in terms of prevention so that the people who are taking drugs are out in the open. 1 in 5 Europeans is taking drugs anyway, and the figures are worse for the US, worse or different, depending on the way you look at it.
I see.
So regulation rather than legalization, I would say, and it has to be done in very small and careful steps.
I see. Do you want to expand on that? What do you mean by careful steps?
Well, careful steps, clearly no big bang, no legalization from one day to the next. I think where we have to start is probably something like marijuana, where the public health issues are fairly clear, easier to control, social issues as well, and where some kind of regulation and marketing control by the authorities could be attempted. And I think we have to, we've got to walk before we start running. It'll have to be an experiment to begin with. The trouble is that legally, all countries basically in the West, or in the world, if you like, are boxed in by the UN conventions, and changing them is a very long shot. Is probably not even in our interest, because we might end up with worse or even less realistic conventions. So some brave countries will simply have to opt out the way some of them have already done. Whether the European countries have the stomach for this at the moment, I don't know. Okay.
All right. Thanks again.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.